In the heart of the galaxy, the mighty galactic conclave stood like a monument to power, a place where empires met, debated, and occasionally plotted. Representatives from 1,000 worlds filled its shining halls, tall reptilian warriors from Xernus, crystalline diplomats from the Lumea clusters, and floating jelly-like thinkers from the Melak rings. For centuries, they had ruled the stars together, their pride only matched by their arrogance. And somewhere within those halls a quiet story still echoed, a tale told in mockery or disbelief about a species long gone. Earthlings, humans, once loud, reckless, bold explorers who dared to fly into unknown corners of the universe with ships held together by willpower and stubbornness. They had vanished generations ago, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Most believed they had destroyed themselves, lost in their endless hunger for more. Others said they had simply faded away, unable to keep up with the changing tides of galactic politics and power. Whatever the reason, they were no more than a half-forgotten myth to most. But everything changed one quiet cycle when a sensor beacon from the neutral trade route near the Mistvale expanse began blinking. It showed a fleet, unknown class, unfamiliar formation, entering neutral space without warning. The readings were strange. Only 13 ships, no registration codes, no transmission pings. A ghost fleet. The news reached the conclave, but it stirred no real alarm. A few old captains raised brows, but the powerful empires didn't flinch. 13 ships. In a galaxy where some fleets stretched over 100 cruisers, this was laughable. A joke. Admiral Corinth of the Vashal Dominion, one of the most ruthless and feared military leaders in the sector, dismissed the report without even looking up from his battle plans. Probably scavengers, he said with a grin, his voice echoing through the war chamber. Send a patrol, standard intercept. Let the new pilots have some practice. Laughter followed. To them, this was a routine matter, a bug to be swatted. But, far from the laughter and mockery, in a quiet observation chamber deep within the Athari Federation's analysis hub, Commander Alai leaned closer to her screen. Unlike the arrogant warlords and blustering admirals, Alai was calm, thoughtful, and curious. She had seen the scan before anyone else. The footage was grainy, filled with static, but there was something strange, something old, about the way the ships moved. Not random like pirates, not cautious like smugglers. They were slow, deliberate, in perfect alignment, almost ceremonial. She enhanced the image. There, on the forward hull of the lead ship, was a circular emblem. It looked worn by time, faded at the edges but still visible. A sphere of blue and green, clearly a planet with a single silver star hovering above it. Her breath caught. She froze the frame. Memories from her academy days rushed back. Legends, warnings, old data files the Federation barely allowed in open archives. That emblem. That's Earth, she whispered, barely able to speak. That's a human fleet. Alai quickly called for backup scans, trying to trace propulsion signatures and power sources, but nothing matched modern tech. The readings made no sense. The hulls were reinforced with strange alloys that didn't exist on current military charts. Their engines seemed quiet, yet their speed was impressive. And most unsettling of all, they didn't answer hails. Not once. Not even a ping in reply. It was like they were watching, waiting, calculating. The patrol fleet sent by the Vashal was just hours from contact, and no one seemed to understand what they were walking into. Alai felt a chill settle over her. The galaxy had laughed at humanity, buried them in history, forgotten them. But something about this fleet didn't feel like the past. It felt like the return of something old, something dangerous, not because it was cruel or loud, but because it was quiet, controlled, and completely fearless. The emblem wasn't just a memory, it was a warning, and the galaxy wasn't ready. In the cold emptiness near the edge of neutral space, the unknown fleet continued its advance, calm, steady, unshaken. It didn't answer hails. It didn't slow down. It didn't change formation. The Vashal patrol, made up of 6 modern warships armed with the latest pulse cannons and anti-stealth grids, approached with confidence. Their commanders were certain this would be a routine sweep, a quick warning to whoever these intruders were. From the outside, the unknown fleet looked outdated, clean lines, simple hulls, no visible external weapons. It didn't even try to retreat or show any signs of defense. To the Vashal, this wasn't a threat, it was target practice. But then came the silence. Within 4 minutes of visual contact, the entire patrol vanished from the command network. The last broadcast was garbled static and a flash of blue light across one of the officers' monitors. When rescue teams finally reached the area, all they found were broken ships drifting through space, systems fried, weapons offline, and no life signs aboard. The patrol hadn't been destroyed in a messy battle. They had been neutralized, completely, silently, and precisely. News of the encounter spread quickly across the galactic conclave. The laughter stopped. The silence became heavier. Analysis teams from the largest empires tried to make sense of the wreckage and data. There were no burn marks from energy weapons, no missile trails, no signs of known technology. The enemy fleet had moved in patterns that bent traditional tactics, accelerating without heat signatures, appearing in locations they shouldn't have reached in time, disabling ships without leaving a trace of direct attack. The footage was short and distorted, but one image remained clear: the Emblem. A circular planet with blue oceans and green continents, a single silver star above, it on every hull on every ship, the ancient Earth symbol. Suddenly the myth had weight. The galaxy's oldest story had come alive, and it was no longer a whisper. Commander Alai, still observing from the Athari Federation's command center, felt a mix of fear and awe. She had warned the conclave, but no one had listened. Now she stood before the senior council of Athari, presenting her findings, her voice calm but firm. She proposed something no one else dared: open a channel, attempt peaceful contact, ask them why they returned, what they wanted. If they wanted war, she said, they would have already taken it. But the idea was rejected. The larger empires, especially the Vashal and the Diraxi sovereignty, refused to believe that a forgotten species could threaten them. Their pride was louder than their fear. They began to prepare for retaliation. Fleets were mobilized, warships were moved to border regions. Leaders declared that the unknown fleet, regardless of its origin, had to be taught a lesson. To them, it was impossible to accept that 13 ships could hold such power, or that humans, once thought extinct, could outmatch them in silence. In the following hours, the tension in the galaxy rose like a wave just before a storm. Trade routes were shut down. Communications between certain factions broke off. Smaller systems went dark, unwilling to be caught between giants. And through it all, the human fleet moved forward without a word, drifting past stations and checkpoints as if following a map only they could see. No aggression, but no fear. They made no effort to hide, yet they couldn't be stopped. Every now and then a signal was detected, brief and encoded in a language long removed from galactic translation systems. The AI interpreters struggled with it, trying to match it with known dialects, but only one word came through clearly again and again: observation. In those quiet moments, when the stars were still and the fleet was just a shape on the edge of a sensor screen, many began to wonder. What did the humans want? Why now, after all this time? And most of all, how had they returned stronger, faster, and quieter than anyone expected? The conclave called it a threat. Alai saw something else: intent, a purpose, one that the galaxy might not be ready to face. In the vast stretch of space known as the Astara Corridor, a strategic point between 3 major sectors, the largest armada the galaxy had seen in recent cycles gathered in perfect formation. Hundreds of warships hovered like a steel wall across the stars. This force, commanded by Grand Marshal Tilvex of the Diraxi sovereignty, represented the pride of the galaxy's strongest empires. The Vashal brought their brute firepower, the Cryan Dominion added their stealth cruisers, and even the proud Illyran Highborn sent their fleet of shimmering command ships. Together, they formed a united wall against what they still believed to be a minor threat. 13 ancient ships flying under the long-forgotten banner of Earth. Grand Marshal Tilvex stood at the center of it all, watching the battle maps with certainty. To him, this was no war. It was a display, a warning to any forgotten or hidden species who might dream of rising against the conclave. He planned to crush the human fleet, not because he feared it, but because allowing it to exist meant opening a door to the past, a time when chaos ruled and order hadn't yet been carved by the current powers. Tilvex wanted to remind the galaxy who held control now. But the moment the first scans detected movement from the human fleet, everything changed. The 13 ships didn't fly in a straight line. They didn't challenge the Armada directly. They scattered, vanished from the main scopes, only to reappear on the flanks of the formation far beyond where any jump should have been possible. One by one, systems on the Coalition's outer ships began to flicker. Not explosions, not boarding, just silence. Engines stopped responding. Navigation froze. Life support shut down as if someone had reached into the heart of the ship and flipped a switch. Panic spread through the command networks. Orders shouted, scanners recalibrated. But by the time one system rebooted, another 2 had gone dark. The massive, proud Coalition Armada, which outnumbered the humans 10-1, was being taken apart, quietly, precisely, and without a single return shot from the human side. It was war without noise, a strategy that made no sense to the commanders who had spent their lives studying predictable battle patterns. The human ships moved like shadows, guided by minds that seemed to see the entire battlefield before it even formed. They never stayed in one place long enough to be targeted. They didn't fire in long bursts or flash their power for show. Instead, they used gravity wells, electromagnetic interference, and deceptive readings to make their enemies aim at phantoms while their real attacks came from angles no one expected. Even Tilvex, experienced as he was, found himself staring at a screen that made no sense. His capital ship, the Crimson Mantle, suddenly dropped from full power to complete blackout in less than 30 seconds. No alarms, no breaches, just darkness, and then a blinking icon in the corner of his personal display. A simple emblem, glowing blue and green with a lone silver star. Then came the voice. The transmission was short, but it echoed through every active channel in the Astara corridor. It wasn't a mechanical message. It wasn't filtered through layers of artificial speech. It was human, clear, calm, controlled. "We are descendants of Earth," the voice said, unshaken. "We do not seek war, but we remember every slight. And we do not run." For a moment, the corridor fell completely silent. The fleet stopped firing. Commanders froze. The image of the Earth emblem pulsed once, then disappeared. Across the galaxy, people began to question everything they had been taught. The humans hadn't returned as savages or conquerors. They had returned with a knowledge of war that was beyond technology. It was personal, shaped by memory and loss. Their tactics didn't follow the logic of empire. They followed something deeper, an understanding of how the powerful underestimate the quiet, how pride blinds the strong, and how history, even when buried, remembers. Tilvex gave no further orders that cycle. He didn't surrender, but he didn't fight either. He simply stood there, silent, as the remnants of his armada floated in confusion and fear. The strategy of the forgotten had reminded the galaxy that the past does not disappear. Sometimes it returns, sharper, faster, and far more prepared than anyone ever expected. Far from the chaos unfolding in space, Commander Alai sat in the deepest chamber of the Athari Federation's Central Archive, an ancient, cold, and heavily secured vault hidden beneath layers of permissions and politics. For the first time in generations, the emergency protocols had allowed a civilian strategist limited access to classified files from the First Contact era, files untouched for centuries, buried after humanity's disappearance. As she scrolled through the encrypted pages, she found no records of surrender or collapse, only data, dense and unsettling. Human warfare, as described by the long-forgotten observers, was never built on numbers or raw strength. It was shaped by ideas, Creative, often unpredictable strategies rooted in centuries of adaptation. The report spoke of asymmetric combat, where weaker forces defeated stronger enemies through speed, deception, and misdirection. There were examples of AI-guided formations that adjusted in real time to enemy behavior, and decentralized decision-making, where even junior officers could change the tide of battle with a single choice. And alongside these tactics, Ally discovered something more unusual: cultural traits that had confused and frustrated early contact empires. Humans, even when cornered or outmatched, rarely gave in. They treated failure as a lesson, pain as a reminder, and defeat as a challenge. They adapted, evolved, and returned stronger, not because they were stronger in body or mind, but because they refused to stay down. Ally's hands trembled slightly as she reached the final file. It showed the emblem now feared across the stars. The circle of Earth, with its blue oceans, green continents, and the lone star shining above. In the old texts, it was described not as a flag or a symbol of conquest, but a promise, a message to any future enemy. We protect. We endure. We never kneel. It wasn't a call to war, it was a declaration of survival. Every human ship that bore the emblem carried that message, quiet and unshaken across the black sea of space. While Ally uncovered history, the present was unraveling fast. The once mighty coalition that had gathered in the Astara corridor was breaking apart. The failed assault had shattered morale. Fleets retreated to their home sectors. Officers questioned their orders. Internal transmissions leaked, showing fear and confusion among high command. Even the Vashal, so proud and powerful, began moving their ships away from the front. No one wanted to be the next target of the silent storm. Every attempt to scan, track, or engage the human fleet ended the same way, with silence. The humans didn't taunt, didn't demand, didn't chase. They moved like a force of nature, unpredictable, fast, and precise. Then came Varnus Prime. Home to one of the most secure conclave defense stations, it had never been breached in recorded history. Its orbiting flagship, VSS Horizon Crest, stood as a symbol of galactic unity and strength. It had layers of shielding, elite guards, and sensor networks so advanced they could detect a comet a light year away. Yet in the early hours of the fourth cycle, without warning, the Horizon Crest went dark. Not destroyed, not attacked. Simply silent. Backup teams rushed to respond, fearing sabotage or internal revolt. But when they finally boarded, what they found stunned them more than any battle. The command deck was intact, the systems untouched. But in the center of the room, sitting calmly with their helmets removed, were 5 humans in advanced armor, quietly waiting. No weapons drawn, no hostages taken. One of them stood and greeted the team with a single sentence. "We came to talk." The Q. Boarding wasn't a raid, it was a message. The humans had demonstrated that even the most protected site in the galaxy was not beyond their reach. But they hadn't taken lives. They hadn't fired a shot. They simply arrived, stood in silence, and left behind a single data crystal. It contained no threat, no demand. Just a record. A clean, detailed playback of every failed attack against their fleet. And a single phrase at the end: "We are not your enemy, but we will not bow." As the conclave reviewed the footage, as admirals and delegates watched themselves fail again and again against a force they barely understood, a new feeling began to spread. Not fear, but respect. Unwilling, quiet, and grudging, but real. The humans had returned not to destroy, but to remind. The emblem they carried was not of war, but of resilience. And that truth was more powerful than any weapon. The great hall of the Galactic Conclave, once a place of pride and certainty, now stood in heavy silence. Delegates from across the stars filled the chamber, but no one spoke. No one laughed or whispered as they used to. The grand empires had gathered in the name of peace, but their faces were tight with uncertainty. No security teams lined the walls. No ships hovered in orbit above with weapons ready. All had been agreed in the terms of the meeting. No threats, no shows of power. just words. At the center of the hall, the platform rose slowly, and standing upon it was a figure unlike those the conclave had seen in centuries. A human. Tall, steady, dressed in a suit that seemed to blend history and future. Commander Ellen Rourke carried herself with the calm of someone who had already seen how this meeting would end. Her face bore the marks of time and leadership, but not exhaustion. Her eyes were sharp, and when she spoke, her voice cut through the air without force, yet with a quiet strength that made every ear lean closer. She introduced herself not as an admiral or conqueror, but as a representative of the Terran Preservation Union, a title unfamiliar to most in the room. With clarity and without pause, she explained what had long been hidden from galactic memory. Humanity, she said, had not vanished. After the last Great War, one so brutal and senseless it left scars across entire sectors, the humans had chosen silence. Not because they were defeated, but because they had seen what victory cost. They withdrew not in fear, but in wisdom, deciding that survival meant more than domination. While the rest of the galaxy moved forward, chasing weapons and politics, humanity watched from the edges. They rebuilt quietly, studied their mistakes, and learned not just how to create stronger ships, but how to become stronger beings. The Terran Preservation Union was not born from conquest. It was born from remembrance of what once was and what must never be again. As she spoke, the delegates listened, not with resistance, but with curiosity. There was no arrogance in her words, no threats hidden beneath them, only truth. She admitted that humanity had not forgotten the betrayals, the mockery, the broken treaties of the past. They remembered every alliance that had been abandoned, every promise broken when Earth was weak. But instead of letting anger guide them, they let those memories shape a new path, one of patience and quiet strength. Their return to known space was not a campaign of war. It was a reminder, a message that humanity was still here, still watching, and no longer alone. They no longer came as the desperate or the scattered. They came as a people who had redefined their purpose. They offered peace, but not from the shadows. They came not as underdogs begging for inclusion, but as equals demanding recognition. Then, as she stepped back, a small projection was activated above the center of the hall. It showed the emblem now recognized across the stars, the blue and green planet, the silver star above it, the ancient Earth symbol. But now everyone in the room understood its meaning. It was not a flag raised in victory, but in warning, a message across generations. Never mistake humility for weakness. The empires had mocked the small fleet. They had dismissed the emblem. But now they knew. That emblem was a shield and a vow, a silent promise that humanity would never kneel again, not to fear, not to arrogance, and not to the weight of forgotten history. In the quiet that followed, no one clapped, no one cheered, but something deeper settled over the room, a rare understanding. The galaxy had changed, and the conclave in all its power now stood in the presence of a legacy not lost but reclaimed. From that day onward, the name of Earth was no longer spoken as a myth. It was spoken with respect, and wherever the emblem of the Terran Union appeared, it carried more than memory. It carried a promise that would never fade.